Hey everybody, it's Olivia here with the Tennessee Conservative to bring you this week's Big 7 update. We've got a lot of stuff to dive into. We're going to talk about Nashville being Nashville, shoving woke down your throat, and using your taxpayer dollars to do it, so that's fun. We're going to talk about daylight savings time, data centers, and a bill set to go into effect, which is actually a really good thing. So there is some light at the tunnel. Be sure to stick with us so you can hear all about it. But before we do that, I just wanted to remind everybody, if you're not already, be sure to subscribe to our free daily e-newsletter. It pops into your inbox every day, chock full of all of the stories and news and goings on right here in the volunteer state that you are not going to want to miss. So all you have to do is text news, NEWS, to 423-205-5600. Easy as that. I also want to remind everyone that we continue to really need your financial support, specifically in the form of recurring monthly donations. Every cent that you guys send is so appreciated, and so we are so grateful for it. And I promise you, it all goes right back into getting out the coverage that you guys have come to expect from us. But recurring monthly donations really help us to budget and plan and have a solid idea of what we have coming in every month so that we can do the best job turning that over into content and news and creation and getting things out and the information out to you guys that you deserve. So if you are able, please go to tennesseeconservativenews.com/support and sign up for a monthly donation today in whatever amount that you feel is right. Again, thank you in advance, and thank you for helping to keep conservative journalism alive right here in Tennessee. All right, my friends, into the fun stuff. So we're starting out. Nashville mayor's budget proposal includes $735,000 for a pro-illegal alien nonprofit. Our favorite Democrat mayor, Freddie O'Connell of Nashville, has pitched a $3.8 billion, that's billion with a B, billion-dollar budget for the city's next fiscal year. But one of the more provocative line items, which is coming under fire, is a proposed distribution of $735,000, that's 3 zeros after 735, almost $1 million, for the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Right Coalition, the TIRRC, a nonprofit which aids illegal aliens living in the state. We've written a lot about TIRRC. They just kind of have their fingers in all the different pies. They are anti-ICE, they are pro-illegals, and they are pro taking your tax dollars to accomplish their missions. They have reportedly received over $3 million in government funding and grants since 2020 and has close ties to the controversial Belonging Fund, which was launched by O'Connell last year. Some of you may remember we covered that. That fund was launched when there were some coordinated Tennessee Highway Patrol and ICE immigration enforcement actions that happened around the Nashville area. And so this fund was set up to funnel money to other nonprofits to help these immigrants who were impacted by ICE operations in the area. So basically, our version of Quality Leering Center level of fraud, where we just take taxpayer money and funnel it through all of these NGOs to then benefit not Americans. We'll put it that way. The organization was also asked by the Biden administration to support the release of aliens into Tennessee's interior. We also covered that. Remember the Biden administration literally flying illegal aliens into the heart of Tennessee and setting them loose, and has expended considerable resources through the last several years fighting immigration-related legislation, defending and protesting on behalf of dangerous illegal aliens, and suing state agencies over immigration enforcement operations. You might remember they really took a stand for Kilmar Abrego Garcia. We covered his story a lot. It was national news. His case was just dismissed. So there you go. That's the kind of stuff these people are involved with. Unsurprisingly, TIRRC's Political Action Committee endorsed O'Connell in his mayoral race in 2023. Shocker. And now he's doing them the favor of throwing them a nice little bone of almost $1 million of support for part of the city's spending on recreational, cultural, conservation, and community support. That's how they're billing this somehow. That's an approach. Congressman Andy Ogles commented on the proposal, pointing to some questionable conflicts in this usage of public money. He said Nashville is giving more than $700,000 to the TIRRC, which is currently suing the Tennessee Highway Patrol for enforcing immigration law. That's true. You can look that suit up. Is Nashville paying the TIRRC to sue state law enforcement? Kind of seems that way. So your tax dollars going to an organization which is then in turn using it to sue your state, which then will use your tax dollars to defend that lawsuit. So just a whole cycle of fun, aren't we having? The Metro Council is expected to vote on the budget on June 17th. So if you are a resident in the Nashville area, you definitely are going to want to keep an eye on that and see, hopefully contact your council members and tell them to strip that out of the budget. All right, on to the next. Woke Nashville group takes issue with proposed FCC warnings regarding gender identity programming. So, a Nashville-based free speech advocacy group has taken issue with a recent FCC inquiry debating whether warnings should be disclosed for programming containing gender identity themes. Housed at Vanderbilt University, the Future of Free Speech, which calls itself a nonpartisan think tank, filed 7 pages worth of comments regarding the inquiry. So the FCC inquiry is seeking comment on further empowering parents to protect their children and make informed choices about the TV programs their children watch. And they filed this back in April. So you guys know when you turn on the TV and you see, it's rated, TVG, TV7, TV14, TVMA, all that stuff. And then it'll show you, basically the trigger warnings in essence, in a good way. But the trigger warnings that'll say there's violence or language or smoking or sexual situations, that kind of stuff. So basically the FCC is saying, hey, should we reconsider these standards to the board that does this? It's a TV Oversight Management Board. And say, should we also put warnings on there basically that this show contains gender ideology, that's going to push gender ideology? I say, yay. Other people's, clearly, not so much. So over the last 3 decades since Congress passed this law requiring oversight, parents have seen a shift in how programming is rated, with inappropriate content being increasingly rated as appropriate for young children. That's true, right? We're seeing stuff that's like, how did this get this rating? More and more gender identity issues are being included in children's programming. It's all over, especially in this month of June, this Pride Month, right? With no disclosure, which undermines the ability of parents to make informed choices about what their children watch. Attorneys with the Future of Free Speech claim the notice is vague, and the lack of clarity is a serious First Amendment problem involving arbitrary enforcement and political pressure around protected expression. I don't think it's protected expression to say, hey, we're trying to make your kid gay, but that's just me. So hopefully the FCC will get some clarity on that. And fortunately, we've got an administration that is working diligently, for the most part, to strip that stuff away and say, like, hey, that's your choice, but you are not going to shove it down the throats of our kids. And parents do have a right to be informed about the content their kids are watching, right? We need to be able to screen that. So I think that would be great to have an identifier that says, hey, this stuff contains stuff, some content that is trying to force gender ideology on your kids. That's a really good thing, because we're seeing stuff. I've seen clips of stuff online, like Transformer shows. They're pushing non-binary, Mickey Mouse, everything. It's everywhere. It's pervasive, you guys. So hopefully we'll get some clarity on that. Not surprisingly, these wokies in Nashville have an issue with it, but we'll just have to see how it all shakes out. Okay, staying right put in Nashville because it's just too good to leave. Nashville police officer spends taxpayer time marking businesses as LGBTQ safe spaces. So this actually made national news, got national attention. Surprise, Nashville doing terrible things. And it was a video showing a Metro Nashville Police Department officer, lesbian, going door to door to businesses and placing small decals that designate them as safe spaces for LGBTQ individuals. The sticker features a police shield overlaid with rainbow colors. You can literally go online and look this up. It's been all over. It's disgusting. These decals signal that the business has partnered with MNPD and will serve as a temporary refuge for victims of anti-LGBTQ hate crimes or harassment, allowing the person to remain on premises while police respond. I don't know about you. I cannot, off the top of my head, recall the last time that I heard about a wave of hate crimes against LGBTQ individuals that required them to wait in a safe space or wish they had a safe space to wait for police to arrive. So that's interesting. The officer's actions are a part of the department's long-standing Safe Place program, which began in 2019 under then LGBTQ liaison officer Katie Poole and was modeled after a similar Seattle Police Department initiative. There you go. That's who we should be taking notes from, Seattle. Participating businesses voluntarily apply for the free decal. So maybe these places are, if you see this in Nashville, you may want to consider not patronizing these businesses. They agree to call 911 if a victim seeks help, but I have to wonder for only LGBTQ victims or for anyone who needs help, and permit the individual to wait safely inside till officers arrive. This doesn't reek of discrimination at all. No, definitely not. Critics, however, see something very different in the action. They argue it represents a clear misuse of sworn police resources and taxpayer dollars. Yep. Rather than patrolling the streets, investigating crimes, or responding to emergencies, the officer is engaged in what basically amounts to ideological branding. Yep. Visiting businesses to mark which ones meet an identity-based standard of safety. So we're now determining which businesses are and are not safe based on whether or not they're willing to conform to an ideology that, by the way, is losing popularity amongst national polls. In a city still processing the 2023 Covenant school shooting carried out by a biological female who identified as a male transgender, and ongoing concerns about crime and police priorities, many Nashvillians question why MNPD maintains a dedicated LGBTQ liaison position and spends officer time promoting rainbow-themed signage. So like I mentioned earlier, using taxpayer dollars to shove woke down your throat without your say, without your consensus. The visual effect of the decals is also contentious. By creating an official-looking marker that singles out businesses as safe for one demographic, the program implicitly implies that unmarked businesses may not be, which is true. This risks stigmatizing non-participating establishments and could invite vandalism or pressure campaigns against them. Like I said, discrimination at its peak just because they can. And putting something that is officially certified by the police, which is supposed to obviously be like a nonpartisan, your job is to serve and protect. Your job is not to do anything relating to political ideologies. It doesn't matter if someone is gay or not. If there's a crime, you're supposed to help them. So it's literally just ideological branding on your dime. So again, if you're in Nashville, you may want to consider calling MNPD and maybe leaving your thoughts about the matter. Okay, jumping over to not Nashville. Cookeville city budget funds nonprofits opposing Trump's mass deportation agenda in deep red Putnam County. We all keep saying it's not happening here, can't happen in Tennessee. Well, here it is. It's happening in Tennessee, not in Nashville, not in Memphis, not in these Democrat strongholds where we think it should be impossible, but here we are. So Cookeville, Tennessee, which is in Putnam County, is a stronghold of conservative values where voters overwhelmingly supported Donald Trump and his platform of strict immigration enforcement, which obviously includes mass deportations and immigration enforcement. Yet, as part of the city's fiscal year 2026-2027 budget, Cookeville is directing $160,000, that's a lot of money, to 19 local nonprofits via recommendations from a 5-resident committee appointed by the city council. So here we go, once again, your taxpayer dollars being funneled into organizations. The government is offloading its responsibilities. It's either adding to itself responsibilities which it's not supposed to take on via these nonprofits, or it's using these nonprofits to do the duties which they're supposed to perform. So either way, not a great look for your local government. Among these 19 nonprofits is a $6,000 distribution to El Puente Cookeville, which has actively worked to support the Hispanic community and mitigate the effects of recent federal ICE operations, and $15,000 to WCTE TV, which is the local PBS affiliate, winner, with ties to left-leaning national programming. Well, right, we know anything PBS is a no-starter, a non-starter. So in late May of 2026, amid targeted ICE operations in Putnam County and surrounding upper Cumberland areas, El Puente mobilized quickly. The group posted on Facebook, "Many of you have reached out asking how you can support our Hispanic neighbors and friends during this difficult and uncertain time in Cookeville." I love how it's always a difficult and uncertain time. Like, not if you're here legally. I'm like 100% certain that nothing's going to happen to me if I walk out the door and ICE is outside, because guess what? I'm here legally. They outlined resources, legal aid, and community support to address fear and family needs resulting from the enforcement actions. Local coverage from the Herald Citizen directly linked El Puente's posts to the ICE activity, noting the sheriff's clarification that local deputies were not involved in the operations targeting the criminal offenders, which really criminal offenders is redundant. You're a criminal by being here illegally. By framing lawful federal enforcement as a source of widespread community trauma and directing aid towards softening its impact, El Puente effectively opposes the very immigration policies Putnam County voters endorsed by a 73 to 26% margin for Trump. I'll go back to pointing out of how this money is being distributed. This isn't being distributed by your represented officials. This is a committee which was appointed by your city council. So who's screening that? Like, the city council is supposed to be screening this, doing that. Did they ask their constituents what were the qualifications to be on this committee? What was the application process, right? So there's all these little things that bureaucratic power actually becomes the challenge because it's so deep seated and ends up making the decisions. So even though your elected officials aren't technically the ones making these decisions, it comes down to the bureaucracy behind the elected officials that end up actually driving a lot of these policies. So it's very, very important to vote in your local elections and screen your candidates in your local elections, because these are the people who oftentimes end up picking the long-standing bureaucrats or people on committees who then get to make these decisions, right? And ultimately, I feel like if it's part of the budget, then the city council has to approve it. So shame on every single one of those city councilors who didn't look into the budget and say, hey, we want to do this, or no, we're not going to do that, who didn't take these committee recommendations and completely shred them apart, right? So twofold issues right there. So residents who voted for mass deportations and border security are now, through their tax contributions, funding an organization actively working to support those affected by such enforcement, right? Again, total contradiction of you voted for your tax dollars to do X, and now your local government is taking them and doing Y. The budget grants $15,000 to the PBS affiliate, like we said, which broadcasts national PBS programming alongside local content. And we all know just the bias and the nonsense that PBS is spewing. And again, using your taxpayer dollars to do it. So even though nationally they've been cut off, mostly, kind of, locally, they're still right at it. So again, if you're in Cookeville, I would maybe recommend getting on the phone with your city councilors and saying, I'm not sure why you approved this budget or this part of the budget, right? Again, super important to participate in local elections, to vote your candidates, to vote and vet, your local candidates. It really matters, because this is how you end up with these kinds of policies. Diving right back in here, Tennessee stands ready to lock the clock in permanent daylight savings time if a federal bill passes. So there's been a lot of debate, and this debate's been going on for years, about staying on daylight savings time, staying on permanent daylight savings time, switching back to permanent standard time. This has been ongoing, and I think everybody has an opinion. There's kind of no middle ground with this, in my experience. Maybe some of you are a little bit more net neutral, but definitely people have opinions on this. But Tennessee passed a bill in 2019, SB 1100, which actually declares the state will observe daylight savings time year-round, contingent upon congressional action. So basically, states are currently allowed to opt out and say, hey, we don't want to observe any daylight savings time, so they just stay on standard time year-round. That's what we see in most of Arizona, most of Hawaii. They already observe year-round standard time. But states are not allowed to do the opposite. So as of right now, they cannot go on permanent daylight savings time unless Congress goes in and revises that federal statute to allow them to do that. So Tennessee has put in place a trigger law, which, if there is congressional action repealing or amending that statute, then this law will take effect, which will put Tennessee on permanent standard time. So the bill, it's called the Sunshine Protection Act. There's been several iterations of it. Marco Rubio actually championed it when he was still senator from Florida. It's been picked up by Rick Scott. Now they're in the Senate. And then, of course, the House representative, I think Vern Buchanan of Florida is the author of this year's iteration of it, at least for the House. So that bill in Congress is actually been looped into a transportation funding package that the House is currently working through. So if that language, which is included in the transportation package, if that package passes, then that will meet the needs to trigger the Tennessee law. So that bill, the transportation package, just received a 41-1 roll call vote in the House Energy and Commerce Committee, to proceed to the full House floor. So we will probably be seeing some action on that soon. Can't get the freaking Congress to pass the Save America Act and, secure our elections, but glad we're really focused on, daylight savings time, which it's a fair conversation to have. But for the Congress that is the most ineffective and has worked the least amount of days and passed the littlest amount of legislation and made the fewest cabinet appointments, I know a lot of that's in the Senate, but still, interesting choice to pick up on this piece of legislation. So, anywho, if that does pass both the House and the Senate, that will trigger Tennessee's permanent daylight savings time law. Now, the challenge is the US has observed permanent daylight savings time before, several times, most recently in 1973 under President Nixon, but it was not well received, to say the least. So enthusiasm waned for this as Americans realized that winter sunrises weren't happening until 8 o'clock, sometimes 9 or 9:30 in certain parts of the country. So they're sending kids to school in the dark. There were reports of increased traffic accidents of kids on the way to school in the dark. There were 8 fatalities in Florida during that time reported of kids being killed on their way to school. There's also other health issues that have been raised, including increased risk of heart attack and stroke, traffic accidents, workplace accidents, all tend to go up statistically during daylight savings time. And sleep experts really are opposed to permanent daylight savings time as it just jacks up the circadian rhythm and everything that's supposed to keep our body moving on its biological clock. So there have been lots of arguments for and against each position. So really, ultimately, the moral of the story is at this point, Tennessee is locked into moving to permanent daylight savings time if this congressional act passes. Now, Representative Chris Todd here in Tennessee did try to introduce a bill this past legislative session, which would have put the state on permanent standard time, actually. So it kind of would have undone the previous trigger bill and put in followed the steps of Arizona and Hawaii and put us on standard time year round. But that did not fail because everybody who was on the committee said, no, we like standard time better. No, daylight savings time better. So anyway, lots of back and forth. The moral of the story is the last time we tried permanent daylight savings time, it was so wildly unpopular that Congress revised its position in about a year and reverted to the 2 shifts of the clock that we have now, the 4 months of standard time in the winter. So I don't know that it'll go much better if we do go on standard time here in Tennessee. A bunch of other states have also followed suit. 18 other states, I think, also have trigger laws in place to go to standard permanent daylight savings time if that happens in Congress. So it'll be an interesting national experiment to see what happens some 40 odd years later, 50 years later. All right, my friends, proposed Tennessee data centers draw continued citizen pushback, and cities are considering limiting construction. So data centers have become this huge hot button topic, definitely not only in Tennessee, but it's become a national conversation over concerns about environmental impacts from conservatives, Republicans, Democrats, progressives alike. There have actually been similar concerns in a lot of these areas raised by everyone in general, as opposed to there's been a real push to get ahead in the technological race and make sure that America is technologically dominant. So a lot of back and forth on these, but people really are not happy with these data centers coming into their community. It really seems to be a hot button topic for big communities and small, and a lot of people are pushing back, including municipalities themselves who are now trying to create regulatory frameworks. We had 7 pieces of legislation in the General Assembly this year that dealt with data center and AI regulation, and only one of them made it across the finish line. So that tells you that A, obviously these data centers and AI are definitely a central focus right now, but also B, very interesting that our legislature couldn't agree on what kind of regulations to put in place for these centers and this technology. So the municipalities are taking things under their own hand and deciding for themselves, which I think is appropriate. So a proposed data center next to the Nashville Zoo has sparked intense pushback from residents and officials alike, underscoring the Metro Council's consideration of an ordinance to limit data centers and place them under stringent regulations. And other Tennessee cities are following suit, contemplating their own regulations and freezes as leaders work to protect residential neighborhoods from the massive facilities. Right now, there are, I believe, 27. There are approximately 27 data centers in the Nashville area, but they have little to no rules for how and where they can be built. So they're just kind of popping up without any regulation, without any guidance, without any rules they have to follow, those kinds of things. No public approval process, etc., other than basic permitting and that kind of stuff. So a new proposal by the zoo, like literally right next door, is really drawing a lot of critique and pushback because people are not happy about this at all. DC Blocks, which is a Georgia-based company, they run a whole bunch of data centers all over the Southeast. has filed permit application with plans for a single-story, 69,220 square foot data center directly next to the zoo's parking lot. So go to park your car, you're going to be looking at the data center right here. The site spans roughly 23.5 acres, and the planned building would ultimately cover an area slightly larger than a football field, including the end zone. So this is a really huge facility. That's a lot going on. And there have been some massive concerns from the zoo itself. There have been massive concerns from residents from this to say, what kind of impact is this going to have on this area? And there's a residential area around it. So what's that going to do to the property? To, again, a lot of environmental questions being raised, a lot of usage being raised. Metro Councilwoman Courtney Johnston said proposals like these are exactly why the council is considering new rules for data center. The Nashville Zoo also released a statement vehemently opposing the data center's proposal. So whether or not you completely agree with the Nashville ordinance, which is going to put a lot of environmental regulations and require they do this and limit some and say you can't be bigger than this and that, how stringent they're going to be, you have to look into that and decide if that's too far or if that's enough. But it's definitely a big conversation that's happening. I think they're supposed to vote on that very soon, that ordinance very soon, if they haven't already. Meanwhile, other Tennessee communities are working to establish their own proactive regulations, including the city of Cedar Hill. We detailed, actually, Mayor John Edwards, we wrote about this, called for a 2-year moratorium on construction of any data centers and cryptocurrency mines within the city limits. That did pass the city council, that resolution he sponsored, so they will have a 2-year moratorium while they figure that out and what they want to go from here. And the city of McMinnville is also considering a data center moratorium after a private developer announced plans for a 25 megawatt, 96,000 square foot facility to support an AI supercomputing platform. And the thing that stood out to me about the McMinnville facility is that 25 megawatts. So the one piece of legislation, like I discussed earlier, that said that did put some AI data center regulations into effect this year, it only applies to facilities that are expected to generate at least 50 megawatts of energy over the first 3 years. So if this 25 megawatt facility is only going to do 25 megawatts over its first 3 years, well, it could potentially be exempt from the law, which states that data centers have to pay for their own infrastructure and upgrades under this bill that was passed. So, and make sure that the increased rates can't be passed on to consumers for the increased electrical usage. So it's just interesting because there were the parameters put on those data centers. It'll be interesting to see if these data centers then say, okay, well, we'll build one that only uses 49 over the first 3 years. And then we're exempt, and it's kind of all for naught, because then you've got Tennesseans paying the increased rates for either building the infrastructure, because a lot of these happen through, again, these public-private partnerships, or their electric rates go skyrocketing because of all of the electricity that these data centers are using. So very interesting conversation. I think it's one that we're going to see carried over into next year, definitely through the summer and definitely through the next legislative session. But finally, ending on a high note today, the Tennessee Anti-Grooming Act is set to go into effect July 1st upon being signed into law. So upon Governor Bill Lee's signature, the Tennessee Anti-Grooming Act will take effect July 1, and this bill aims to protect minors from sexual exploitation by criminalizing grooming behavior, which is now explicitly defined by law, and supplements existing child protection laws through the creation of a misdemeanor or felony offense for adults who engage in the practice of grooming minors or persons who are mentally compromised. The offense of grooming carries a range of penalties from Class A misdemeanor to Class B felony, depending on a variety of factors, including the severity of the offense, the position of trust or authority that the offender might have, and then the ages of both the offender and the victim. So a couple factors decide which scale they'll slide into, but this legislation was sponsored by Representative Jody Barrett. One of, I think, the best accomplishments of the 2026 legislative session was putting into law what does grooming mean, and not just putting it into law, but actually putting teeth behind it and making a crime, creating a criminal offense. And that is something that a lot of times gets kind of left behind here in Tennessee, is we'll pass a law and it sounds really good and it says, hey, you can't do this, but then there's no enforcement or teeth to the measure. So this has some enforcement. I know the bill sponsors worked very hard to make it palatable to everyone, to make it acceptable to all of the different law enforcement agencies and the stakeholders and everybody involved. And this passed, I'm pretty sure, with bipartisan support. So it just tells you Maybe not. Maybe that was a different one. But ideally, it would have passed with bipartisan support. But the idea that grooming is now a criminal offense in Tennessee, or will be as of July 1, is a huge step forward in protecting our kids. So, really great accomplishment there. Really exciting to see that go through, and really exciting to end on a great note of good things are happening in Tennessee. So, like I said, thank you guys so much for tuning in, for sticking in to the end to see that light at the end of the tunnel. Remember to subscribe to the newsletter. Be sure to find us on all of our social media so you don't miss a thing coming from the Tennessee Conservative. We appreciate you guys. Have an amazing week, and we will see you back on Monday with a brand new newsletter full of all sorts of stuff right here going on in Tennessee. Thanks, you guys.